All right, boys and girls, we are back on another edition of the Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech, and California is on fire. Here's Gavin Newsom's explanation for why. Cut 14.
Look, this isn't just about protests here in Los Angeles. When Donald Trump sought blanket authority to commandeer the National Guard, he made that order apply to every state in this nation. This is about all of us. This is about you. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived. He's taking a wrecking ball to our founding fathers' historic project.
Here's what President Trump had to say about that. Cut 2.
You want a civil war on the streets of America.
No, it's just the opposite. I don't want a civil war. A civil war would happen if you left it to people like him. And I liked him. I always got along with him. Never had a problem with him. But he's grossly incompetent.
Yeah, give us your real take on Gavin Newsom, Donald. Look, I think that the situation here for Democrats is obviously one that is terrible. They are caught between a rock and a hard place. They can't go after the faction, the very loud faction of their leftist supporters who hold the view that borders don't exist, shouldn't exist, that people should not in any way be deported or held to account for the crimes that they've committed, and that anyone who goes to the street in order to protest the actions of the ICE deportations is doing so with moral authority on their side, bravely standing up for what they believe. Or is that really what's going on? Cut 6.
This is so ridiculous. This doesn't look like this is they're protesting for ICE or anything. This is they're doing just for the looting the stores and everything. I saw they break into the Apple store, they break into the Adidas store. This is not they're doing protest.
That owner can speak with John Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania, and find agreement, who tweeted out, "I unapologetically stand for free speech, peaceful demonstrations, and immigration, but this is not that. This is anarchy and true chaos. My party loses the moral high ground when we refuse to condemn setting cars on fire, destroying buildings, and assaulting law enforcement." That seems to me to be a pretty consensus opinion in America, but it's also one that you won't necessarily find in the ranks of Democratic leadership. Here's Mayor Karen Bass. Cut 4.
We need to stop the raids. This should not be happening in our city. It is not warranted, and the only thing it does is contribute to chaos. This was chaos that was started at Washington, D.C. On Thursday, the city was peaceful. On Friday, it was not, because of the intervention of the federal government.
Well, at least Karen Bass will admit that there was chaos on the streets of Los Angeles. That's not something that some of her colleagues in the Democratic Party are willing to say. Here's Maxine Waters.
And even those who were out of step with what we are advocating, peaceful protest, did not create any violence. Nobody was shot. Nobody was killed. Get it in your head. And so when martial law is called, what are you going to say? I missed the point. Don't miss the point, you all. Don't think that somehow, because they called out the National Guard, there was violence. There was no violence. I was on the street. I know.
Yes, she knows. She was on the street. Well, your lying eyes are going to tell you otherwise when you look at the images of billowing smoke, cars set on fire, clear anti-property violence, clear aspects of this where people were arrested for violently assaulting law enforcement in the process of doing their duty. And in fact, it got so out of hand that Nancy Pelosi has her own theory of the case for what was really going on.
And I say this as a former party chair, when there is a large gathering of people, the anarchists see it as an opportunity and they move in. So always have to be careful whether you see a burned car or a broken window or whatever it is. It may be the exuberance of the moment, but it may be the anarchist setting in. I heard one of the former police chiefs of Los Angeles speak about this on Sunday.
So if you've got that, it was chaotic, it was peaceful, and it was just exuberance, or maybe anarchists. They can't decide how to frame this because the frame is obvious. Everyone understands what's going on here, that radical leftists who are engaged in this process of going after ICE, of trying to dox them, trying to attack them while they're doing their jobs, that they actually welcome this type of instance. They welcome this type of violence. They welcome these circumstances because they believe in actually fighting back in the streets, in organized resistance and the like. And all of this plays into the hands of President Trump. It's the reason why we've seen a 40-point shift to the right in CNN polls from the first moment that he was running for president in 2016 to now in terms of his support from immigrants. It's because they support his policies that are weeding out criminals and people who need to be deported from within these communities who've been there for far too long. And the only people who seem willing to recognize that, other than Senator Fetterman, are people on the outside looking in terms potentially of the next Democratic presidential race. Cut 7.
Why the hell are you playing right into the hands of Donald Trump? Because I got news for you. On this particular issue, as it involves migrants, immigrants, those who are undocumented, dare we say illegal, in the United States of America, he's winning on this issue. There's a reason he won the popular vote. There's a reason he won the Electoral College vote. There's a reason he won every swing state. There are people within the United States of America that want our immigration crisis addressed and want the situation resolved somehow, some way. And the person that seems eager to bring a resolution to the table is President Donald Trump.
Stephen A. Smith, people, maybe he'll be going up against Gavin Newsom on this exact point in 2028. Wouldn't that be a sight to see? But he's not wrong. He's exactly correct. And his analysis of what's going on in this country couldn't be more accurate. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to see enhanced action by ICE reportedly in cities like Seattle, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and Northern Virginia. Raids, obviously, that are going to continue, targeting of criminal individuals for deportation. This is something that the administration is ramping up, and they're leaning into it, and they have the people at their back. The polls show that. And the more that Democrats refuse to wake up to that reality, the more they're going to be trapped through the lens of the summer of Floyd for as far as the eye can see. There is no right to strike against the public safety anytime, anywhere, as Calvin Coolidge said all the way back in 1919. And by sitting on their hands, by refusing to address these actual problems, these Democrat leaders are showing that they are nothing of the kind. They are striking against the public safety, and that's something that needs to be addressed. Joining me now on the Big Ben Show, Matt Finn, Fox News national correspondent. He's covering what's been going on in California and paying attention to the backlash surrounding these ICE raids. Matt, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get your perspective after a couple of days of this on what's going on in the tenor of the mood in Los Angeles, the reaction to what was a pretty violent series of incidents, and then, of course, the fallout in terms of the president calling in the National Guard. What are you seeing there?
Well, right now, of course, it's early in the morning, relatively calm. But last night was the first night of Mayor Bass's curfew. And that's covering like a square mile of the downtown where most of the violence has been. And our reporters on the ground there and our teams there say that police had to make dozens of arrests to enforce that curfew and basically kick out some of these rioters or protesters who potentially could have turned violent again last night. So, this morning, we are seeing the curfew hopefully work. But this comes after days and days of violence and unrest, Ben. And I've covered, the George Floyd riots in Minneapolis, Antifa riots up in Portland, BLM in Chicago. And of course, a lot of the George Floyd riots back in 2020 spread all over the United States. So many of your listeners or viewers probably saw it in their own city or hometown. And I think that in general, people are fed up with the anarchy and the lawlessness and businesses being looted. Dozens and dozens of businesses looted here in downtown Los Angeles, from mom and pop shops all the way up to an Apple store. And I think, quite frankly, Americans are sick of seeing the lawlessness. So hopefully the curfew will prevent some of that from happening in the coming days. But we do know that the weekends, things tend to flare up again. So we'll be back out there and keeping an eye on it.
So there was obviously a lot of criticism directed at both Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass during their response to the wildfire season. And so you would think that when something like this comes along, another crisis that they have to deal with, they would be really quick to act. Is the mood there one of believing that they perhaps did, but they didn't know how to handle it? Was it that they took too long to act in terms of responding to what we saw, in terms of the billowing smoke and everything like that happening on the streets? Or is it basically just that they couldn't do what they needed to do because of the politics of the situation?
Well, Ben, people live in echo chambers. So of course it depends who you ask. I'll be honest, Fox was aware that these raids and these targeted enforcements were going to happen here in Los Angeles. We were aware a couple of days prior. These targeted enforcements and raids have been happening in various cities like Denver and Boston. Personally I thought maybe, the feds can come in and do these types of enforcements and not have these riots and anarchy break out. But no, it happened. So what's happening here is there are these targeted enforcements, these organized riots at places where there are, people who have warrants for arrests, where there are known illegal aliens working in the United States. And then there's also these collateral arrests where, hey, if you're in the parking lot and you see a couple more, suspicious people or undocumented workers, whatever you want to call them, running away in a Home Depot, then they're arrested as well. And I think that some of the outrage publicly is, the feds went into just a Home Depot parking lot here and they targeted some innocent people who were trying to work. And that's really not the case. That was part of a broader organized enforcement here. So if you're in the echo chamber of, Tom Homan and the feds came in and they just arrested some people in a Home Depot, the people who are trying to, make a better life in America, then that incited a lot of the violence and the arrest that we saw. But if you're a part of the broader understanding that these types of enforcements are happening all across the country in an effort under the Trump administration to improve the safety in my neighborhood and in your neighborhood, then you understand that there's also going to be some collateral arrests and stuff of that nature. The outrage that I was seeing online and from people that I'm talking to here in LA is, we're sick. We're fed up. We don't want 2020 to happen again. We don't want the George Floyd riots to spread all across the country again. So yes, bring in the National Guard. Ben, people were calling for the National Guard in 2020 all over. Where is the National Guard? Where are the feds? And, Tim Walz in Minneapolis was deeply criticized for not bringing in the Guard sooner. I was there for that. So I think, a lot of the frustration and anger at this point aimed at Karen Bass and at Governor Newsom was they should have been here sooner. And you guys should not be out there trying to minimize the efforts of the federal government that are improving our neighborhoods and removing wanted criminals from our streets.
There has been so many different interesting reactions to the way that this has gone on. And one of them in particular that has stood out to me is just how much unwillingness there is to directly go after the chaos that these protesters are creating, even after the lessons of the past several years of everything that you've talked about. John Fetterman is standing out there kind of on his lonesome, criticizing this openly in terms of members of the Senate. And others, of course, are downplaying it in terms of Maxine Waters and others saying basically that there was no violence. When it comes to the attitude of the people and the small businesses that are impacted by this, isn't there some level of frustration that after everything that we've seen happen over the past several years, the Democrats who are essentially representing, in California, it's essentially a one-party state, that they don't learn from any of the past experiences with this, that say that calling out chaos and calling out property damage is not something that is going to hurt you with the community?
And you know, Ben, I mean, the news this morning, right now, ICE announced it arrested an illegal alien from Mexico. You may have seen the images of suspects throwing Molotov cocktails at law enforcement. Now, you and I know those are lethal, deadly weapons that can kill not just the person you throw them at, but many people around you. We just saw people being lit on fire 11 days ago in Boulder, Colorado, and that anti-Semitic attack. So this morning, ICE just announced it arrested an illegal alien from Mexico who had been previously deported. He is going to be charged with attempted murder. A federal contact that I'm talking to said that they are actively pursuing criminal charges against anyone who threw a Molotov cocktail at law enforcement. So stand by for, I think, some developments there. But it's like you cannot separate reality from the images and the pictures of people throwing Molotov cocktails at other humans. That is an attempted murder. You know, so to wake up the next day and justify that the National Guard may not need to be here, or that these are peaceful protests, that's something that we hear all the time. But I think Americans and our audience, no matter what side you stand on, you cannot look at these images and not understand the need for enhanced law enforcement. I'm not here to, debate the constitutionality of whether the National Guard and the Marines need to be here. That is actively pending in court. But I'll tell you what is, covering protests across the country. A lot of people say the need for the National Guard is necessary. The Marines are here as well, here in Southern California now, deployed by the Trump administration. But, you know, and go on the LA Times right now. Go on foxnews.com. There are local mom and pop shop owners in downtown LA saying, God, we cannot bear this again. We cannot take the brunt of the lawlessness again. You cannot argue with the images and the videos. And it's just staggering that some politicians still try to dispute them or refute them and say, just peaceful.
I wonder what you expect, given the fact that we now, have multiple outlets reporting that there's going to be additional ICE raids targeting a number of different cities and areas, including Seattle, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and Northern Virginia. Obviously, all blue cities, blue areas that have engaged in policies that and have leaders who have criticized the president over his policy related to this. What should those leaders expect in terms of, and those communities expect in terms of the fallout if you see similar types of raids start happening across the country?
Well, the targeted enforcements and the raids are going to continue. You know, the thing is, one of my federal contacts said they've actually been going on for weeks here in Los Angeles, kind of behind the scenes. You know, a lot of times they don't get the attention of these organized rioters. But they are happening right now, actually, in Los Angeles. They're going to continue. The federal government, Homeland Security will tell you to your face, we're not going to stop. So, what I think is a lot of these targeted enforcements, Ben, for example, one this morning where they're just going after one individual, it may not get the attention of the cameras and the neighbors around them, because it basically may just look like an isolated arrest when really it is an immigration enforcement. What happened here in Los Angeles, of course, is they were larger raids, and that got the attention of the rioters and stuff. Look, I mean, I'm not going to give advice to any of these political leaders, but just know that it is going to happen. And, the story gets twisted. And here's the other thing is the federal agents will tell you, yes, we are also making collateral arrests. I mean, one of my federal contacts told me, sometimes we're out in the field and we see two guys see us, they take off running. We do arrest them, and lo and behold, they're illegal aliens, and we do deport them. That is how, the quote, everyday Joes are getting arrested. But it's just a matter of fact that they're here illegally. And if you're an immigration agent, you're going to arrest them and deport them. So, the story or the narrative gets twisted that, the federal government is targeting Home Depot parking lots, which they may, well, in fact, but it's also part of the broader movement. And here's the things, Ben, you and I know, go on my friend Bill Maloogian's Twitter. He does an excellent job with immigration. We know that. I mean, it is time after time. These people are murderers, rapists, child rapists, so it's not just people here trying to get a job that are being deported, but those collaterals are happening. So just, when you hear, if it happens in your town, if it's going to be happening on the East Coast, dig into the details and see the bigger picture. Who was also arrested in addition to
one last question for you, Matt. We've seen reports about, different organizing factions whether it's nonprofits or social justice organizations or the like that are, handing out material to support these folks who are engaged in this violence, that we've seen, a lot of different things related to this. What is it that you're tracking and aware of when it comes to the actual, funders or organizers, to the degree that those exist, of these types of events? How organic are they really? And are there actually organizations behind the scenes that are helping make this violence happen?
I've covered protests and riots all across the country. There are absolutely organizations behind the scenes and funding behind the scenes. And again, the videos speak for themselves. Our Fox 11 team here in LA broadcast someone showing up and handing out face masks to the rioters in the streets of LA. I mean, this is on the record. This is not disputable. Who are those people? Fox 11 is getting to the bottom of that. I've seen some crazy things, where all of a sudden Antifa or BLM will pop up a bunch of umbrellas so that the drones above them can't see them and the people on the ground level can't see them. And then they, shuffle around and carry out their agenda with the umbrellas. Portland, extremely organized. So you and I know that these are not just little grassroots efforts. There's money and organization pouring in, and it's happening here in LA again. And I think that, they wait for the moment. Trump's people are in town busting a Home Depot. Yeah. Let's go. But when really they're making arrests of people murdering and raping people.
I think it's really interesting because I think the difference now is that people have become experienced enough in terms of viewers to question what they're not seeing in terms of the things that are in front of them on camera, the things that helped, frankly, make the situation a lot more violent and a lot worse than it could have been if those organizations didn't exist. Matt Finn, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. You can follow Matt on X at MattFinnFNC. And, of course, we'll be paying attention to your coverage. Thanks so much for the work that you do. Happy to be joined now on The Big Ben Show by Mike Solana. He's the founder of Pirate Wires, a media company that has a newsletter and a podcast that I highly recommend that you check out, covering all sorts of different issues, but particularly the intersection of technology and politics. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to talk to you about a couple of different things, but particularly if we could get started for folks who don't know you, talk a little bit about your background in Silicon Valley and working with the tech community and kind of how you had this interesting path to starting Pirate Wires in the first place.
Oh, yeah. So, I came into tech almost 15 years ago now. I worked for Peter Thiel, and he was my mentor and is currently still my boss at Founders Fund, which is my other full-time job. I'm the CMO at Founders Fund, which is a prominent venture capital firm in the Valley. I came in as the kind of creative guy. My background in my early 20s back then was in publishing. I was an editor at a publishing house called as if maybe no one knows it. I don't know. Penguin Books. I think it was bought by Random House.
Yep.
That was a long time ago. I was always into sort of culture and writing, and my background was just super different than everyone I was surrounded by. And then I was a writer. So over the years, I kept writing. About 5-6 years ago, I started writing much more seriously about what I was seeing out there in the sort of, at the time, a kind of war between the tech press and the tech industry. And they didn't have a guy who could write. And that's, I think, where I came in. Then I just sort of grew. The audience grew. I raised money, built a team, and now we've got a media company.
It's one that has interesting takes that I think I often share them because I think it's stuff that is maybe off the beaten path or a different perspective on things than what we normally hear, particularly in the swamplands of DC and the Acela corridor.
Thank you.
I wanted to get your take in particular about the trend line that you certainly had noticed and that I read you noticing months earlier about the inevitable tensions in a new coalition that is formed on the American right that brought together a lot of people from the tech industry, a lot of innovators and, top minds, but also extremely wealthy people and powerful people with an American right that has, leaned into very heavily its populism in recent years. Talk to me about some of the tensions that you saw there, even earlier than what we saw with play out between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, which we'll get to. What were some of the seeds that really made you start paying attention to this tension?
I think it's always been a pretty uncomfortable alliance between the two. And you could just talk about the difference of values and things like this. The first like dust up would have been the H-1B fight that happened back over Christmas. And it's interesting on a lot of these issues where the tech right and the sort of populist right don't agree. I find myself personally conflicted. And the H-1B thing was sort of one of these where I understood where the populist right was coming from. There was this sense that we were just importing people rather than training them and skilling America. We have 300 plus, however many, 350 million Americans at this point. Like, we can't find engineers. We can't train them. That sounds like an education problem. What's going on there? But then on the tech side, it's just like, listen, these people, we do need to we need to build companies. We don't have enough people here to do so. So we're going to bring in the talent or whatever. And I don't know. That was just one of them, though. Obviously, the incentives of the tech right in that context are pro-business, and then populist right, which is largely like a labor party, I think at this point, or a labor faction of the party, is classically, and I'm not even using this as a pejorative, but Luddite in this way, where they see the technology as, in some sense, correctly, in imposition on the economic sort of ambitions of labor. And I think, you can make your arguments all day about, well, long term, this stuff is good for the world. I believe that's true. But short term, yes, there's going to be joblessness. And that's just, fundamentally at odds in that one sense, on the business sense. But then I think there are value differences as well. Yeah, I think, and just before we get to the value differences, you say Luddite. And I think that is actually, and I'm glad that you put it in the context that you don't necessarily view that as a pejorative, but the way that I would sort of say it is, I view the instance of robot trucks as being something that is a great step, in terms of enhancing our ability to transport things and do so effectively and efficiently. Whereas the populist right would say, no, we should ban robot trucks, right, because that's going to take away jobs that that currently go to truckers all across America and that don't require necessarily the advanced degrees that go into keeping the robot trucks active and going and things along those lines. So I think that it's not a lie to say the Luddite thing the way that you have. How have you seen that play out since the beginning of this second Trump administration in terms of that tension? Well, I think the trucks thing is so important because that was probably the first moment. You always sort of have a sense that this is not a healthy or a sort of real natural fit, but it was Tucker Carlson talking with Ben Shapiro. They were having a debate on one of their podcasts, I forget which, and the question of self-driving trucks came up. And Ben asked Tucker if he would ban them, and Tucker sort of said, "Of course I would ban them." And he made this big show of how obvious it was to just ban the trucks, and sort of not even getting into the complexities of that myself on where I even land. It just is very clear that is something that is wildly divergent. His frame there is wildly divergent from the average technologist, whether they're right or left. So I think it's been coming for a while. I think the self-driving stuff is one of the bigger ones, which is kind of interesting because now we're seeing the self-driving Waymos and such becoming this kind of, I guess, symbol of like class rage that is bipartisan. Did you tweet? It was you that tweeted out, I think, the elves leaving Rivendell. Yes, when the Waymos were leaving Los Angeles. Look, I think that this is a really interesting element of this because we've seen it in the past on the divide between pro-business neoliberals on the left and their traditional Labor Party base. But now, because of this great sort that's happened, because of the ways that the right has shifted, because it's a new coalition for them, and it includes, of course, a more diverse coalition, but also one that has a much heavier representation of people who might be at odds with this. It seems to me like both parties are kind of going through this YIMBY-NIMBY tension. And I don't really know, though, where things are going to end up, because I do think that there's some natural knee-jerk conservative positions, like the language that their politicians are used to saying is so much more consistent with a pro-business world than it is with a kind of backwards-looking
we are the enemies of business development. We're the enemies of new technology. That's not really been part of their language. Instead, it's been this, no, free markets can put the world in the palm of your hand for years. Which one do you think is going to be on track to win out in both parties?
I think populism is on track to winning in both parties. I think that the path forward for business in the context of populism is something sort of, this sounds crazy, but it's something sort of like mercantilism. Yeah. You have to be able to make the argument that business interests are in the interests of the populace in America, and that protecting your businesses via, in the Trumpian sense, a combination of things, heavy tariffs on, let's say, Chinese rare earth metal manufacturers or refiners, and then subsidizing that yourself and abolishing the laws that are prohibiting us from doing this kind of stuff. And you do that to sort of generate jobs and things like that. That's where you have an intersection between business and popular interest. And I think there's nothing like that on the left, which is an inherently it's not anti-business on grounds that it's anti-labor. It's sort of conceptually anti-business, which is like a whole other thing that at least is not on the right.
One of the ways that business navigated that, of course, in recent years was to play the woke DEI game to the nth degree, to send money and resources toward all of these different social justice projects, and essentially, do the equivalent of buying indulgences in order to, have people look the other way for all the other ways that they were making their money. Obviously, that's something that has shifted in recent years. But my question for you about this industry is, this shift within industry is, do you think that that's something that is permanent, like we're not going to go back to doing that kind of stuff in the future? Or do you think it's just temporary because Trump won and now we're going to sort of downplay all this stuff and we'll be back to doing, Northrop Grumman covered in all of the different pride symbols, as soon as he's out of office?
I think there are always going to be people who are trying to do this, but you have to understand that so much of the DEI stuff in tech was coming from the media. You have to go back like 7, 8, 9 years ago when all of this stuff was really getting kicked off, longer, 10 years ago, and that James Damore wrote his letter at Google. And the media landscape was, there were journalists who were in charge of tech culture. There were people in Brooklyn who had wildly divergent views from the people who were actually running tech businesses, who were dominating, our sense of identity. And so when they wrote about you in a negative way, you wanted to appease them, and journalists internally did, but the whole world is different now. The media landscape is wildly different now. We have an entire crop of sort of like tech influencers like myself, to be honest, who are far more influential than your average Brooklyn asshole, who, if anything, they want to be on our shows and talk to us now because the access game has shifted. You have new media companies. You have a new landscape on Twitter. That could change tomorrow, depending on, the whims of Elon. So who knows? But it's just the old world of like a handful of big media companies where these random writers right out of school are going to determine what is cool and not. That's gone, which means the average founder in tech does not have to appease them. They can stake out a sort of controversial space. Like, for example, I remember Alex Wang of Scale had a whole thing on we're hiring for merit, and it was very much an anti-DEI manifesto, but it came at the end of all of us had sort of, the tech industry had changed its mind on this. And it wasn't even controversial, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg has quietly done this, and it's not controversial. No one's even bothering to write about it because it's not going to get clicks because people don't care. And so at the worst case scenario in the future is it will be something that you can decide. Like people will disagree on it, but never in a way that forces the company to change.
It's still a vast improvement from where things were.
Yes.
You mentioned Elon, obviously, and I do want to talk to you about him. So we saw this play out in real time. It's funny when there's something that comes along that's related to X, the Everything app, where it actually does explode into real world conversations. Meaning like people, I was sitting in a restaurant and people were all talking about it all at the same time, like at different tables. So my question for you is, were you surprised at the tenor of the Musk-Trump quote unquote breakup, whatever you want to call it, that played out on X, or was this in keeping with their personalities respectively?
No, I've written about the two of them. I knew this was doomed from the start. That they're two alpha kind of guys who have never worked for other people, who naturally, I think, they seek to be in charge. Like just that alone, I don't understand how someone like Elon works under someone like Trump, even though he clearly respects the man. I just didn't think that was going to happen. But then their specific personalities, I guess the only thing that was shocking to me was that Trump seemed, for the most part, other than when he threatened to take back Elon's contracts with the government, he seemed to be restrained.
Yes.
But Elon exploding in the way he did is something that, poor guy. We see it. We see this is how he does. This is how Elon does. He gets a little turned up.
When you are predicting the moments when he will, do you have have you tracked it as a pattern just based on sort of he's leaning into this, he's leaning into this. I can see the blip coming.
Well, no, you just see him. You can see him get agitated about something, and then he starts posting a lot about it or talking a lot about it in different contexts, and you just kind of feel it. You can feel the storm coming, and that was quite the storm. What was unusual is also how he apologized following that, or to the extent that he apologized. Like, I've never seen him regret one of these explosions before, but I think it's too late. I think that relationship is over now.
I certainly think it's changed, but I don't know if it's over. And one of the reasons why I think that is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. One is, I think that Elon went so far in one direction that the fanciful idea that, outreach from Ro Khanna is going to change anything for him on the other side is just not realistic. And then the other thing is actually that restraint from Trump, because at least one of the things that I've said before is that when I interviewed him in the Oval this term, it was the first long interview that he had done, and the conversation was completely different from the last time I interviewed him, which was at the end of his first term, where first term he was very tense. He was kind of had this feeling of being surrounded type thing, where he was having to fight off everything. This time around, he seemed very relaxed and magnanimous and wanted to talk and was in a good mood and that type of thing. And it's similar to what other people have said. Bill Maher said basically the same thing when he had dinner with him. I think that he's more magnanimous now. I don't think he holds grudges the way that he used to with some people. And so, I don't know, maybe there's an opening. Do you think I'm wrong?
Well, I don't think that he's going to do anything to Elon's companies that are not in the benefit of his long-term strategy, either politically or for the country. I think it's more like, does Elon ever have the same amount of influence that he did in the first few months of his term?
Yeah.
And I think that is no, because I think that Trump is just not going to unlearn the lesson of the Epstein tweet, really. I think that was that plus also, I mean, there's the Elon sort of claiming victory for Trump, sort of saying taking credit for the victory.
I think that
pretty
one
bad.
was even actually worse in terms of.
Yeah. I mean, knowing Trump's ego, that was probably a really big mistake. That was the worst mistake maybe. But the Epstein thing is also just I don't know what those two men have talked about. I don't know what's true there and what's not. And certainly you look at that as the president and you think, well, I can't trust this person to not have another one of these episodes, unfortunately.
From the outside, obviously, there was a ton of anticipation for what Elon was going to try to do with Doge. But for the people in Washington who are used to bureaucrats running the show and playing hide the ball with all of their different funding and everything else associated with that, there was also a built-in assumption that he was not going to be able to match the kind of large figures of success that he was saying. There was a lot of people here who were quite skeptical about it, folks who are veterans of Capitol Hill and working with the bureaucracy and that type of thing. Do you think that things could have gone differently there if, perhaps there had been a longer timeline, or if things had shifted earlier in terms of understanding that people don't really care about the amount so much as they care about the waste itself? People get pissed off, especially swing voters, when they hear that money is being wasted. They don't care as much about the overall total that you end up with, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I think the whole thing was kind of the messaging of it was all pretty ill-conceived from the beginning, because in the early stages, remember, it was not just money, and it was regulations that were bad that we were talking about, things that were getting in the way of progress and things like this. And then Vivek crashed out after his insane tweets back during the H-1B thing. And it just kind of evolved into what it is, which is this hunt for wasteful spending. Of course, most of the overspending that's happening it's all defense and welfare, and no one's touching that, which they made clear. So it was always like, what are we doing here? And he set himself up. I believe that Elon unfortunately set himself up for failure. For, again, as you were saying, I agree, there was no reason to do that. It could have just been like, we're targeting stuff. There's all sorts of crazy, I know some Doge people who they're working on things like, there'll be like 5 IT departments working on in one government office. And it's like, okay, let's just have one, like things like that. Like if that's the mandate, that's great. And like, that's a victory, and you could just declare victory. Unfortunately, that was not going to be it. And Elon was also he was not really in charge. Like he got in there, and I do believe he kind of optimistically thought that he could do what he did at Twitter for the government, but that's not possible. It's not how Washington works. And, he crashed against the rocks like a big, beautiful ship.
Well, I think that
lost to the night.
I think the other thing that he probably ran into is, when you're doing something like that to Twitter, you have people within the building who have fiefdoms to defend, and projects that they want to protect from getting swept away. It's just that in Washington, those people are called senators, and they have a lot more power to exercise in blocking you, and frankly, in giving lip service to everything you're doing in front of the cameras and behind the scenes. Be like, no, this is the pork that I need to keep for myself. In terms of the lessons taken away from that experience, have there been any lessons that have flowed or that you've seen into the conversation among people in the Silicon Valley tech world about the lessons of Elon's experience, either something positive that they could use potentially in the future to help succeed where he failed, or something negative about, like, even when Elon tried to do it, there was no way to get through?
I don't know that everyone was supportive of Elon. Everyone was excited about it, but Silicon Valley's work with the government is much bigger than Elon Musk right now. You have a huge sort of movement of companies working with government, partnering with government in different ways. Either and mostly, a lot of it is defense, but it's bigger than that even. And you have like the crypto people as well. And everyone's kind of out there in DC right now. There's also a lot of other tech people working with the government right now. So I don't know that really changed anything. It was more a read on Elon. And I don't think it changed the way that people in Silicon Valley are thinking about the government. It's still actually much more positive now than it was like 10 years ago, where people thought, oh, you can't do anything with the government. Now people are still kind of wanting to do stuff with the government. I
wonder what your take is in general on the way that at least one aspect of this was depicted in the media. Namely the installation of a lot of AI models within the work that's being done by the government in a lot of different areas. And this was something that has been played up in the media in a fear-mongering way, I would say, over the course of the past couple of months, suggesting that these things will be used to target individuals or go after them or something along those lines. Now, personally, I think that these could be potentially quite useful in terms of identifying problems within the way that government functions. What is your optimistic and your pessimistic take on the application of AI within these systems?
I think that it just comes down to what you think about our government. The technology, not just the AI tools, but every piece of great new software that the government is using that has come from us, or even hardware in the case of companies like Anduril or whatever. It just comes down to whether or not our government is run by people who are good or by people who are bad. And so the critique of something like Palantir, for example, working with the government, I don't believe that the critique is of Palantir. I think that there's one good critique, or the good critique's not of Palantir. There's one good critique. It's a libertarian critique of our government. And if you believe that, then it's like, okay, well, then you just don't want our government to have tools that work. But if you want our government to be efficient at what it is doing, then you want to use these things. The question is just like, what is it doing? And it will be doing a combination of things. It will be doing things like identifying and deporting illegal immigrants, helping to identify criminals, identifying tax fraud and things like that. And if you just are opposed to those things, then yes, this is a nightmare for you. But if you're in favor of those things, this is good. And I should just say also, I was very nervous about the Biden administration. And I saw a lot of real authoritarianism out of them. And I'm very aware that we could easily have a left-wing, a hostile authoritarian left-wing government when, Ocasio comes to power or whatever it is, and she'll have all these tools as well. So that's the danger. The danger is just how much do you trust the other side in power?
Yeah. And I think that the other element of that too is we've seen them misuse this in the past, and they didn't need AI to do it. They didn't need AI to, abuse the IRS to go after all of those different Tea Party, organizations back in the day. They didn't need that. And in fact, I think the institution of some of this stuff is just saying, hey, if we're going to do this, shouldn't it work? and that I think is a fundamental, again, potentially tension about what we've been talking about. Before I let you go, when it comes to the trend lines that you're paying attention to in this second Trump go-round, what's been the most interesting development to you, and especially if it was one that went against perhaps what your expectations were about this second term?
I didn't think that he was going to do anything about illegal immigration. I thought,
really?
I was very skeptical after his first term. It just didn't seem to get much better. And now, even while deportations are still actually low, they're kind of on par with the Obama administration. I think lower than where Obama was. And he's made a lot of noise about them, which is making his job harder. But the border crossings they've cratered. And I believe that while he's in office, at least it's going to stay that way. And I think that the deportation stuff is going to accelerate. I believe him now. I guess I wasn't convinced that he really meant it, and now I am, and that has been, a surprise to me.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think a lot of people shared your belief on that, and then I think that what happened is he truly does believe in this, and also when this activity started, his poll numbers on it went up, not down. And so I think that encouraged a lot of Republicans to stand with him on it. Mike Solana is the founder of Pirate Wires. You can follow him on X at Mike Solana. That's MICSOLANA. Subscribe to Pirate Wires and get their podcast wherever you get your podcast. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you for having me.
They did an illegal act by kidnapping us on international waters and against our will, bringing us to Israel, keeping us in the bottom of the boat, not letting us getting out and so on.
President, do you have a message for Greta Thunberg, and did she come up on your call with the Prime Minister today?
Well, she's a strange person. She's a young, angry person. I don't know if it's real anger. It's hard to believe, actually, but I saw what happened. She's certainly different. Anger management. I think she has to go to an anger management class.
How dare you?
How dare you, indeed. Greta Thunberg saying, how dare you, possibly about being forced to sit in a chair that does not recline, oh, the humanity, right next to the toilet when she's being flown back and, under her own explanation, kidnapped by the IDF after her silly flotilla escapade. I'm joined by Dylan in studio. So Dylan, when you saw the choice of positioning for the ticket that Greta Thunberg got, the free trip, did you cringe from having had an experience like that in your own air flying past? Because I certainly have.
Yes, I've definitely been stuck in that seat before. It's just the whole irony of her being like a professional victim, just like professionally.
Yes.
And then she's like, there's so many good pictures that came out of this whole thing, like her accepting the sandwich from the IDF soldiers and smiling at it, and then her being stuck on objectively the worst seat on the plane, and just like, it's so funny. It's so funny.
She does this for a living, and more power to her. But it is funny because it's definitely one of these things where professional victims, when they don't have things go their way, it's very infuriating for them about how much they've been inconvenienced. There's several different Hollywood things I wanted to talk to you about, but let's get to at least one of them. This Justin Baldoni, $400 million defamation lawsuit against Blake Lively was finally tossed this week. We saw this kind of playing out in slow motion over the past couple of weeks as this seemed to be approaching. And obviously Lively has her own narrative about what went on there. And the thing that I found to be most interesting is kind of a footnote to this, is that because the judge threw out the defamation case, that means Marvel won't have to turn over what it calls proprietary and highly confidential documents and communications about the development of Ryan Reynolds' Nice Pool character.
That's so funny. Yeah, so I mean, I guess they can't be deposed, so they can't.
Nope.
That's going to stay sealed. So I guess
were you
we'll
making
never
fun
know.
of me? You have to admit you were making fun of me.
I think it's so funny.
That's
funny.
But we wish them well. Though I think that everybody got hurt by this whole thing. It's the opposite of last week's Taylor Swift situation.
Yep.
There was an interview with Gigi Paris, I guess is how you. I assume that's how you say her name. Who is Glenn Powell's ex-girlfriend that came out in a podcast this week. And surprise, surprise, the reason that they broke up is because Powell leans so heavily into the promotional obviously fake relationship between him and Sydney Sweeney around the time that they came out with their movie together, Anyone But You. Obviously a big success, that movie, and a big part of it was the fact that they were the two stars are both great looking and have great chemistry. Dylan, would you be willing to risk a relationship by having a fake relationship with Sydney Sweeney to promote a project?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I love my wife. I remember seeing this whole thing play out.
Professionally though, they want you to do it. It puts butts in seats.
They want you to do it, but I mean, I remember seeing this play out online, and whether or not any of it was genuine, the relationship between Sydney Sweeney.
I mean, you're Glenn Powell. You've been around for a while. You've had your shot. You get paired with the up and coming, glowing hot young thing, and it's one of these things where, like, you have to play into that. I mean, look, let me put it this way: at least they had legitimate chemistry, and this was not a situation as awkward as like Tom Hiddleston dating Taylor Swift for 30 seconds, which has to be tops in terms of one of the most awkward ones of all time.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely felt genuine, and maybe it felt too genuine. I mean, I remember on TikTok just seeing how many people being like, talking about Gigi at the time, being like, how could you let your man do this? And that probably was embarrassing for her to some extent.
It certainly sounds like it.
Yeah.
She says, I just felt like I was just the pet of the dogs. But look, hey, I mean, I think Glenn Powell is one of these guys who, you do what you have to fit in that narrow window for success. Finally, and this is one that I don't know if Cookie added this or if you did, but a conversation about who drinks Dr. Pepper. Is this something that is of interest to Christine for some reason that I don't know? I don't know why she added it to the list.
She hates Dr. Pepper.
Is this okay? This is the thing. She hates it. Why? What's her problem with it?
Also not a fan.
Not a fan?
Also not a huge fan.
So apparently they're bringing back Diet Cherry Coke to compete with Diet Dr. Pepper Cherry. Dr. Pepper has been going up and up and up in terms of its popularity in America. It surpassed Pepsi last year in terms of being the number two soda in America. What is your beef with Dr. Pepper? Why do you have a problem with Texas?
Well, here's the thing: is I already thought Dr. Pepper was cherry flavored. Am I wrong?
Technically, no. It's not supposed to be. It leans into it more in the cherry version.
Yeah. Okay. Because I mean, I just think it's okay, but it's weird because I like Cheerwine. Have you had Cheerwine before?
Of course I've had Cheerwine.
I love Cheerwine, but I don't love Dr. Pepper, so I don't know what's
Well, look, I
I
need to try to convert both of you. I don't know how I'll go about dealing with that, but I'm going to reach out to, any of the, if you ever go into, the Texas representatives' offices, it's pretty much, fridge is full of it.
Just Dr. Pepper everywhere.
Everywhere. So, I'm going to have to convert the two of you. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can email us, as always, at bigben@fox.com. My thanks to Dylan, to Christine, even though she's AWOL today, and to my guests. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.